and welcome to Trade Talks, our quarterly discussion of critical issues surrounding trade and transportation. I'm Tom O'Brien with the Center for International Trade and Transportation at Long Beach State University, and I'm very pleased to have as my guest today Stephen Cheung, who is the president of the World Trade Center Los Angeles and also the executive vice president of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation. Stephen, welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to embark upon a discussion of some trade history, leading us to, I think, a critical discussion of some of the issues that are gaining a lot of attention in the press today, and that includes tariffs. But I'd like to start maybe by having you talk a little bit about what you do at the World Trade Center and also the LA Economic Development Corporation and the various responsibilities you have there.
Sure. The World Trade Center Los Angeles is a nonprofit serving Los Angeles County, and we're actually a wholly owned subsidiary of the LA County Economic Development Corporation. So basically, we're the international trade arm of LAEDC, and our focus is to really attract foreign companies and international companies to open up operations here in Los Angeles so that they can bring and they can create good jobs here locally. And for LAEDC, the focus is really on economic development. What can we do to start getting ready for the next generation of jobs? What do we need to do as a region in order for us to prepare for the future changes that are happening to our economy? That's the main goal for LAEDC. So combined together, you can see that's why we have a huge focus on international trade and foreign direct investments.
And so I think the natural link there is that trade also means jobs for the region.
That's correct. The LAEDC, actually, we also have a research arm, and we do analysis on the economic impact of various industries. And recently we found that the trade and logistic industry, for example, is responsible for over 580,000 jobs for the local region. So it's a huge impact on the economy. And most people, when they look at trade, they think of import-exports, which is very important to the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Los Angeles, and also the airports. But the other part that they have to look at is also foreign direct investment as well. Combined together, we're talking about millions of jobs here for the Southern California region.
And I think what's interesting is that for the people who only think we make movies here
Yes.
in Southern California, it comes as a surprise at how much of a trading center we are.
Yes, it's sometimes it's a good problem to have, but sometimes it's also a very challenging problem to overcome. When we travel internationally to promote Los Angeles, a lot of folks don't understand why we're there, because all they can see is that Los Angeles and this entire region, we have Hollywood, we have sunshine, we have beaches, and we have traffic. What they don't realize is that, for example, we're the #1 customs district in the United States because we have the #1 and #2 container ports in North America with the Port of LA and Port of Long Beach. At the same time, we're also the #1 manufacturing center in the United States with over 350,000 jobs here locally in that sector. So Hollywood is fantastic, but the entertainment industry is only our 3rd largest industry here. So the issue is, how do we overcome that image of that we're just Hollywood, because there's so much more in Los Angeles than Hollywood.
And you yourself have a background in municipal government, so I assume that's good training to sort of to go on the road and talk about the importance of trade to our region and the value that we offer to our trading partners.
That's correct. Prior to this position, I was working for the City of Los Angeles in the Los Angeles Mayor's Office for 8 years, serving both Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa as well as Mayor Eric Garcetti. And in that role, I was really promoting international trade on behalf of the City of Los Angeles. But that training, that experience I got really allowed me to really tell the story about Los Angeles, but not just LA City. One of the things that we try to do for the rest of the world is to educate them that there are 88 different cities in Los Angeles County. That's Santa Monica, Long Beach, Beverly Hills, that are well known around the world, are actually all different cities within Los Angeles. But the tricky part also is a lot of them get confused. What's the difference between Hollywood, West Hollywood, East Hollywood, North Hollywood? Is there a South Hollywood? Why not? And which one's the city? Which one's the LA County and incorporated, and how do they get their permits? So that's what I try to do, is to educate the public and the international community that there are a lot of opportunities here. For example, we have over 10.2 million residents in LA County. And in LA City, it's a great city, but there are 4 million people there. So how do we basically expand the opportunities for not just LA City, but all of LA County, the 88 cities that are incorporated, including the City of Long Beach?
And trade doesn't tend to recognize boundaries in the same way that mayors and governors do. How much do you find yourselves having to sell U.S. trade as well when you're on the road? Because the competitiveness of the nation, policies, probably have a higher an impact at the national level than at the municipal or regional level.
Yeah, so I think the challenge is there are definitely synergy between the federal, state, and local level. But when it comes to business, I think what they're looking at is just basically as a market as a whole. The Los Angeles market is a great market. As I mentioned before, 10.2 million people, which means 10.2 million consumers, live in LA County. But the greater Los Angeles region, the 5 counties, including Ventura, San Bernardino, Riverside, Orange, and Los Angeles, that's 18.7 million people living in the greater Los Angeles region. Of course, California, now we're close to 40 million people. So for the international companies that are either selling into this region or opening operations, they actually want to reach this entire market, and they don't want to stop there. They want to reach across all the state line and reach the 300 plus million population that's here. So for them, it's about business. So these geographic boundary, it doesn't really matter to them. But when these national and international trade policy issues are at play, it restricts their ability. Sometimes it helps them sometimes, but most of the time, especially when it comes to tariffs, it makes it more complicated for them to access this market.
So, and I assume you have counterparts in other cities in the US.
Yes.
So does that mean sometimes you're working with them and
Yes.
sometimes trying to steal each other's business
Yeah.
or trade opportunities?
We have a lot of frenemies around the world. I think when it comes to Southern California, what we try to do is basically work in partnership, because when we tell the story that Southern California is a much larger region with a much larger population and a larger GDP, it's an economic impact that we can measure and we can advertise. At the same time, if those companies, for example, open up their operation not in LA County, but they go to Riverside or San Bernardino for their warehouse and distribution needs or for their logistic needs or whatever it is, they probably still use the Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Long Beach. Mm-hmm. So with that said, we still generate the taxes. However, if they open up their operations, say in Illinois or in Maine, we might not see any impact at all. So that's why we much rather having them a bit closer to the geographic region of Southern California rather than open up operation elsewhere.
And I think that people tend to take a shorter term view when it comes to trade, but there's actually been a long trajectory in development of trade policy over time. What changes have you observed since you've been involved in this, and what are you seeing from changes in our international partners?
I think trade policy is always going to fluctuate depending on the government and depending on really the pattern that's happening right now. And I think global trade is transitioning very quickly in many, many different ways, whether it's introduction of various technologies that have never been seen before. But looking back at history, for example, the transformation of actually containerizing cargo movements have really transformed this entire industry. And because of that, Los Angeles has benefited greatly, sometimes to the detriment of other regions as well. So now we're going through another transformation in terms of just globalization of manufacturing, the way that the goods are distributed, the way that things are manufactured and also consumed. So with that said, we can expect a lot more changes coming down the line for various policies and for various governments, because there also are changes, whether it's Democratic or Republican leadership, or internationally, whether in China or in Japan, when they have a leadership change, those relationships change. So we can expect that sometimes they have areas of collaboration they can work on, and sometimes there's going to be tension and disagreement, which we're seeing right now.
I sometimes find myself telling my students that containerization was the killer app of its day.
Yes.
And it's a relatively recent phenomenon, right? Yes. We're only talking about the late 1950s and 1960s. It's been about 100 years maybe since we've been talking about a free trade environment.
Yeah.
Do you think we exist in a world of free trade, or is it freer trade, or what do you see as sort of being the force that drives growth in trade?
Yeah, I think the term sometimes free trade gets it's a bit misleading. I think right now when people think about free trade, it's basically with zero access, with zero restriction. And I think as you're looking at various countries as they're developing, including our own throughout our history as well, there's certain sectors that we're doing well in, and we want to export more of that. And there's certain sectors that we are transforming, and we need more raw materials, so we're trying to import certain products. So it's really a global logistic supply chain that we have to look at as a comprehensive aspect. So when you look at certain issue, and again, right now with our current administration, there's a lot of focus on the trade deficit. And most economists will let you know that the deficit really isn't the main issue here, is access. So the administration right now is doing a lot of different changes when it comes to the policies to influence the trade deficit, hoping to reduce it. But instead, over the last year, we've seen that we have an increase in the trade deficit of over $100 billion. So sometimes the policy don't really directly affect it the way that they want it to. So there's a lot of complex factors that are involved. So we really have to break it down to look at the various nature in terms of what products is going where and why we're looking at certain region before we can even decide what's the best policy. And usually a simple one-size-fits-all policy doesn't work. Yeah.
You mentioned access. Talk a little bit more about that. Are there particular geographic areas or particular products where you think there's tremendous opportunity for U.S. producers to find markets overseas?
Sure. So, well, stepping back a little bit even more, right? The United States, especially the Los Angeles region, we've been benefiting greatly because of the growth of Asia, specifically China. As China's changing their economy over the last 20, 30 years, they've became really the manufacturing center for the world when it comes to more low-end products, whether it's t-shirts and shoes and furniture. And because they're able to produce it in such a cheap cost, it becomes very difficult for us to compete with that pricing. And that's why we lost some of those manufacturing jobs to China, but at the same time, we lost some of those jobs to automation as well. But that aside, it creates a great opportunity because China is now transforming yet again. It's becoming a consumer market. They're consuming a lot more because their middle class is growing very, very quickly. So that becomes an opportunity for us to sell our products, specifically with food, agriculture products. There's a lot of food safety issues with China, and their citizens are very concerned about the quality that's there. So California and Los Angeles have been known for our quality and for our standards. So it's actually a huge market for us to be able to export our products directly into China, into a 1.4 billion population market. But if we have trade restrictions and trade tariffs, that's going to make our product a lot more expensive compared to other products coming from, say, Australia, New Zealand, or Europe. So that's one of the issues we have to face.
That's interesting. And as the middle class increases in size in China, some of that production moves further west in Asia. Do you have any concerns that California or the West Coast loses some of its comparative advantage in terms of geography by having Europe and the East Coast of the U.S. closer to production centers, say via the Suez Canal?
Yeah, so there's always going to be disruptions and challenges and changes with the global market. We can't just basically rely on one market forever. So yes, as China is changing their economy, what we're seeing is that the labor cost is no longer cheap. So a lot of that labor force and a lot of the manufacturing are now being shifted to other locations, like in ASEAN nations, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, so on and so forth. And with that, we still have a great access because as ASEAN is actually growing very quickly as well, the geographic proximity is still close enough to us that we're not going to lose the competitive advantage. However, you're right, when it comes to the Panama Canal and the other things that are happening, I think back in 2006, 2007, they announced in Panama that they're going to be expanding the Panama Canal that will increase the capacity for ships to be able to move through. And the West Coast ports were actually a bit nervous about that because it creates an opportunity for some of these shipping lanes to be shifted to go to, say, the Gulf Coast or also the East Coast and go to Savannah or New York, New Jersey and bypass California altogether or the West Coast ports. But what ends up happening is the shipping industry was changing very quickly as well. Ships were getting bigger and more fuel efficient, and the scale of economies made it a lot cheaper for you to ship a lot more goods in those large ships. And Panama Canal was only ready for about 13,500 TEUs.
Those are those 20-foot equivalent units.
That's exactly it. The 20-foot boxes that you see out there. Most of the boxes now on the road are about 40 to 53 feet, but the way that they measure is 20-foot equivalent units. So these ships are able to carry about 13,500 of them that can fit through the Panama Canal. But the new ships that are coming in are now 16, 19, 21,000 TEUs that can't fit through the Panama Canal. So with that, we have a competitive advantage because the Port of Long Beach, Port of LA, has spent hundreds of millions of dollars over the last few decades making sure that we're big ship ready. And so we have an advantage that a lot of other ports don't have.
Now, some of that we clearly don't have control over.
Yes.
The expansion of the Panama Canal, the size of the vessels. So when you in Los Angeles look to Washington or Sacramento to create an environment that makes your job easier, what are you interested in?
I think when it comes to Sacramento and comes to Washington, one of the things that our message to them is that they have to look at the job impact. I think a lot of our representatives in Washington really focus on certain sectors that they want to hold on to, certain manufacturing sectors. And sometimes because California and Los Angeles is doing so well, that they don't see that actually the job impact is a lot more significant here because we have so many more jobs. So for example, you might be focused on certain manufacturing sector with 70,000 steel workers. But with tariffs that are introduced, you're actually affecting the logistics sector here, which is 580,000 employees. So when you're trading off, certain regions, maybe in Pennsylvania, the steel workers there might get the benefit, but at the risk of our industry here, which is a very robust industry that impacts not only Los Angeles and California, because of our logistics sector is actually the gateway for the rest of the United States. Our capacity is not only with the shipping capacity and the port capacity, it's also our infrastructure when it comes to rail and trucking industries as well.
Yes.
So we have over 100 trains coming in and out of the Los Angeles region every single day that connects to major transportation hubs like Chicago, so that we can get our goods from Los Angeles to and from the West Coast to Illinois and distribute it to the East Coast as well. So our impact is not local, our impact is international, and specifically it has a lot more effect on the rest of the nation as well. And that's why what we're hoping Washington and Sacramento will realize is that the effect of California when it comes to international trade is really, it touches every congressional district.
So sometimes your audience actually isn't the trading partners, it's the policymakers and the legislators in places who might have a more localized or myopic view of trade than you think is warranted.
Absolutely. Our audience is actually everybody. But one main audience that we really are still struggling to reach is actually local Angelenos. I think a lot of the folks locally, because we take it for granted what we have here, we actually don't understand the impact of international trade on a local region. A lot of folks say they don't understand these trade policy talks and discussion. They don't know how much it's going to impact them, so they don't take a stand and they don't raise an issue with their local elected officials to represent the best interests here. What they don't realize is when they're sitting in the room, their clothes, their shoes, their furniture, their glassware, their forks are probably somehow connected to international trade, and probably one, or if not all the products, probably came through the Port of Long Beach and Port of Los Angeles or the LAX somehow, including their phones as well. So if there's any disruption there, it actually affects their daily lives.
Well, Stephen, this is a fascinating discussion. We're going to take a brief break right now, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about how trade policy is made in Washington, what we can learn from other places around the world, and what the future of trade holds. So join us when we come back. My guest is Stephen Cheung with the World Trade Center Los Angeles.
Should your company buy or sell, expand or not, relocate, or simply stay the same? If you'd like to examine past and present predictions, integrating finances and people, and make future predictions based on all that information, a career in economics is for you. You can become a part of this exciting field with a degree from Cal State Long Beach.
Welcome back to Trade Talks. I'm Tom O'Brien, and my guest today is Stephen Cheung with the World Trade Center Los Angeles and the Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation. Stephen, welcome back.
Thank you.
We ended our last segment talking a little bit about the impact of Washington and what it means for trade in your world,
Yes.
in Southern California. I think it might be illustrative for our viewers to have a bit of a better understanding of how trade policy is made, who's involved, how important is the president.
Yes.
We know it's important, but maybe some of the background would be helpful.
Sure. In the current structure, the President of the United States has a lot of leeway in terms of being able to set trade policy standards and agreements. So he directs his cabinet members, including U.S. Trade Representative, which is Ambassador Lighthizer right now, to negotiate with the rest of the world on various trade agreements. So, for example, if we feel that there is a benefit for us to target a certain country to come up with agreements so that certain products of ours can enter their market more freely and vice versa, we can discuss the negotiation. In previous administrations, I think a lot of folks have started moving towards a multilateral agreement where many nations are involved. For example,
you mentioned ASEAN earlier, right?
ASEAN, that's exactly it. There's something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, that started years ago under previous administrations. And 11 countries outside of the United States, so combined with the United States, it's 12 countries on the Pacific Rim combined together, negotiated over 7-8 years this trade agreement in terms of what products and what services, and they want to standardize trade. You can see the benefit behind it because for us in Los Angeles, our exporters, our small, medium-sized firm, if you want to export, say, into Australia and Japan, you have to basically have different paperwork and different standards. If you unify all of it, you're able to access those markets with the same standardized rules, so it becomes very attractive. Under this current administration, I think the focus is more on bilateral agreements with one-on-one, and I think that's what our president currently is looking at, as it's more beneficial for us to negotiate with a stronger hand in that sense. So we've been targeting China and also with with Mexico and with Canada as well. So President Trump has issued some policies that have set tariff standards against China, basically imposing a 10% increase in tariff for all products coming from China in certain categories coming into the United States. And the Chinese government, President Xi Jinping, in retaliation, also imposed certain types of tariff against our products going into China. Now, President Trump has upped the ante and has put 25% potential tariff on over $250 billion worth of goods. And that is now on hold for a little bit because both the Chinese and the U.S. government are now negotiating, hopefully, a trade agreement that will neutralize that and will help us come to an agreement where we don't have to use these tariff standards against each other. If that doesn't go well, that means that over $250 billion worth of good going into China right now will have 25% more duties going into China, which will make us a lot less competitive entering that market. And we can expect the same thing coming on the other end because we're going to see retaliation coming from China.
And that's 25% on top of an already existing baseline of
That's correct.
Of tariffs and regulations.
That's correct, yeah. And what we're also fearing is if we do the full 25%, there's going to be retaliation coming back from China, and the president of the United States has the ability to actually up the ante again, and actually right now the trade balance between the two sides, between China and U.S., is about $570 billion. And what we're fearing is all $570 billion worth of goods that are coming, being traded between the two sides will be on that tariff list.
And I assume that there will be some winners and losers, that in particular some commodities or products will be harder hit than others.
So, for example, when the tariff was first introduced against certain Chinese products, the Chinese government retaliated and targeted certain sectors like bourbon in Kentucky or pork, because they know that they know our political system very well, and they know certain congressional members and senators are very they care about certain products because it represents their district. So they're targeting that kind of industry. So there are losers definitely that are targeted. So for us in California, one of the things that we forget is that we're the #1 manufacturing center in the United States with over 350,000 manufacturing jobs right here. A lot of our products are actually going to be exported into China. If these tariffs are coming, that actually limits our ability to sell to one of the largest population on Earth.
Yeah, I think most people would be surprised to know that LA County is the largest manufacturing county in terms of output in the country, which is astonishing.
Yeah, and I think we take it for granted because I think LA is so spread out, sometimes we don't see, but when you're looking back in history a little bit, you have to see the aerospace and defense sector, for example. Their home base was right here. During the Cold War, a lot of the defense products and also aerospace products were made right here in El Segundo, Torrance, and also Santa Clarita, and also Palmdale area, and it continues to do so. Over the 80s and 90s, we saw some of these aerospace companies, their headquarters leave this region, but their supply chain never left us because we have the talent base. We have the ability to actually manufacture these products that no one else can because we have very unique set of skills. On top of it, medical device and equipment, because we have the ability to make these high precision equipments. A lot of other countries, for example, China's great in manufacturing, but again, with maybe shoes and shirts, but not these really precision, high valued products as well. So Los Angeles is actually a great center for not just international trade, but for manufacturing and exports. And these trade policies will have a direct impact, and in my view, probably negative against this entire region.
So you're not the U.S. trade representative,
No.
right? And these decisions are made elsewhere. But how do you communicate that story to people who are in a position to make trade policy?
So a lot of times what we need to do is work with our local elected officials, whether it's congressional members or senators, to convey the message of the importance. And because of our governmental system, when the president and the White House is working well with both the Senate and Congress, there's a lot more communication. But sometimes, based on other issues, including immigration or opioid addiction, there might be some other political factors involved that would put trade as a bargaining tool. So we might not be able to get our message across through our elected officials. What we're hoping to do is also convince the private sector and the manufacturers to tell that story as well, so that they can influence not only the California delegation, because a lot of their manufacturing that happens right now, you have to understand, manufacturing, you don't get the raw material and basically build the mold and create the screws and build everything here. We have a lot of component parts that we get from the rest of the nation and rest of the world. So the impact is not just in Los Angeles. We might be buying certain material from Utah, certain component parts from Arizona. We need to basically have our manufacturers communicate with those suppliers, to communicate with them, their elected officials that might have more influence with the White House. So it really needs to be a national conversation, because the impact of trade for this region really affects the rest of the nation.
Well, and I don't know that the California delegation has a history of being on the same page on pretty much anything, so it's probably good to have others help tell that story.
And it's been very challenging right now, because I think the state of California right now has made it very strong. Both our governor and also many of our congressional members have very strongly stated their opposition to many of the president's policies. So sometimes our the door to the White House is not as open to us as it was in previous administration. So what we need to do is basically to do a bipartisan really approach and focus really on the economic and the job impact rather than politics, because after all, this is business, this is trade. It impacts Republicans and Democrats alike.
Well, and speaking of politics, you mentioned the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement.
Yes.
And those renegotiations. Formerly known as NAFTA, maybe still called NAFTA by some in the trade community. But can you talk a little bit about how that process took place and sort of the state of our trilateral trade agreement with those three countries?
So NAFTA was created over 25 years ago now. And basically, it's a trade agreement between United States, Mexico, and Canada. And there's been some positive and negative impact. I think economic analysis have mixed reviews in terms of the benefit it has. But I think overall, it's created an elevated region for the three countries to work very closely together and have a lot more influence internationally when it comes to our ability to produce goods and really raise the level of living for our economies. Certain regions lost out. I think there's some manufacturing that left the region, United States, and actually went to other places. I think a lot of people think it's Mexico, but in fact it might be actually China, or it might be automation. But there's some questions about it. And because of that, I think our president has pushed for a new NAFTA, and they call it the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement. In Canada, I think it's actually called the Canada-Mexico-US Agreement. So it depends on what the focus is. So after some negotiation, there was an agreement between the United States and Mexico that might have actually left out Canada, and Canada joined in. This is sometime last year. But the basis has been negotiated. The problem right now is that it needs to be ratified through our Congress. And because we have a switch in Congress just this year, right. We're not quite sure what the future of it is. We don't know whether it's going to be ratified by our current Congress. And second of all, we also have a change in government down in Mexico, with Peña Nieto stepping down and with López Obrador taking the presidency. His views are very different. So even though there's an agreement there, if our Congress, for example, is pushing for any changes to the current negotiated contract, that might not be acceptable to the Mexican government or the Canadian government. So this is creating a huge issue because we have this agreement that's sitting and waiting to be implemented, and meanwhile we don't have a path forward. So while tying back a little bit in terms of our manufacturers, some of our manufacturers are very afraid of what's happening with China. As a trade tariff is increasing to 10%, for example, some component parts, screws. If they continue to buy screws from China, that's another 10% that they have to pay. They much rather manufacture locally, and they try to basically do this in Mexico. But if we don't know whether Mexico is also going to have a 10% or 25% increase, why move your entire manufacturing base here into North America when you don't know what the outcome is?
You're painting a picture of tremendous uncertainty.
Yes.
So down at the level of the manufacturer, right? How do they respond if they're not sure whether it's a 10% plus 25% or a 10% base, and for how long?
Yeah.
It creates tremendous challenges, I would think.
That's a question, and I don't think anybody has an answer to this because it's been changing day by day, month by month. It's been very frustrating for many folks. For a lot of businesses, they need the certainty because they need to make the investments and they need to make these orders. So, for example, we have a electric scooter company. Electric scooters are very popular right now across the United States as a solution to the end-to-end solution when it comes to transportation. So, whether it's Lyft, whether it's Bird, or whether it's a personal scooter, electric scooter that you can buy, we have a local company that's actually assembling the electric scooter right here in South Bay area. They get their screws from China. And basically with this tariff that's coming online, what they're trying to do is basically they think that it's a hot new item. So they're going to pass on the additional costs to the consumers because they can, because it's a hot new item. But what about for those items that are no longer hot and new? Will the consumers be willing to pay, for example, if you're buying a washing machine that you used to pay $1,000 for, is now $1,100? Will you pay for it, or you would basically wait for the price to go down? And meanwhile, as you're deciding, excess inventory is now stuck in your retail store, in your Walmart, in your Home Depot. And so when they don't have, they have excess inventory, they're not going to order more from the manufacturer. So that's going to decrease the volume of trade between the two sides, which means the shipping line are going to carry less of those goods. When you have less volume, actually increases the cost even more because of the spot rate increase. So further increasing the cost of that very washing machine to maybe $1,200, $1,300, suppressing the consumer demand.
And by spot rate, you mean the rate on the open market?
That's exactly it, for the shipping containers that are going back and forth, because you have the economy of scale. The larger ships you have, the more boxes are coming through, the lower the costs. But the thing is, if you have a big ship and you don't have enough boxes, you're going to have to increase the rates. And that's what's going to be passed on again to the consumers. So ultimately, these tariffs that are imposed on China are actually being paid for by the U.S. consumers. We are paying for it right now.
And you've painted a picture again where the negotiations with China have an impact on our trading relationships with Mexico and
correct.
Canada as well. Should we assume a geographic comparative advantage in Southern California or in California because of our proximity to Mexico? Does that help us maybe compared to other parts of the U.S.?
Yes and no. I think, when it comes to the proximity with Mexico, we see that, for example, manufacturing products right now, especially when it's manufactured in North America, it's not so simple as it's manufactured in the U.S. or manufactured in Mexico. There are many studies that have shown that a lot of the exports coming out from Mexico, they actually have anywhere from 10 to 25% U.S. product in there, because the manufacturing base is this. They put certain products into, for example, a TV set or telephone. certain parts are made in Mexico and is shipped over to the United States, where you add additional component to it that's a bit more high value, a bit more labor intensive. And they send it back to Mexico to put some plastic covering on it, and finally it's exported out of Mexico as a Mexican product. But those components that are actually made in the US and actually assembled in the US don't get counted. So the manufacturing and the supply chain is so complex and so integrated right now that yes, there should be a comparative advantage because we're so close to Mexico, but we also have these, this is also true for Arizona and Texas. So there's also, we mentioned earlier, our frenemies, other regions that are also really trying to secure these business opportunities as well. So they're offering incentives that California sometimes we don't offer. So this becomes not just an international issue, but also a state-to-state competitive issue as well.
Yeah, on a previous trade talks, we had some guests from the Canadian government talking about the importance of trade. And one of the interesting things that came out of that discussion was the number of times that goods cross the border, particularly in terms of, say, for example, automobiles, before a finished product is produced and on the market.
That's right. And these partnerships, it didn't come out of nowhere. Because of NAFTA, it allowed this cross-border collaboration to happen. And so it's been built over 25 years. So for us all of a sudden to revert back and to not have NAFTA, it becomes problematic. Can we adjust to it? Yes, of course. But the thing is, to your question earlier, how long are we going to wait for this transition period? This uncertainty is making it very difficult for our manufacturers and for our private sector to really plan ahead, and a lot of them need that leeway in order for them to plan ahead. And so I think the President's and the White House current stance is that they want a better trade deal with the rest of the world. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. The question is, what does better mean? Better for whom? And meanwhile, while we have this transition, there's going to be a lot of losers, using the President's word. But the collateral damage, what we're afraid of is that we're going to be the collateral damage here in Los Angeles, because we are the trading hub. We're the #1 customs district in the United States with over $430 billion of trade with the rest of the world that's happening right here in Los Angeles every single year. So if there's one region that's actually going to suffer or benefit the most from these trade agreements, I think it's going to be Los Angeles.
Right. Well, on that ominous note, we're gonna pause for this segment, but when we come back, we'll continue that discussion talking about the future of trade in Southern California, and also the future of trade and what impacts technology might bear on the discussion. This is Trade Talks. Our guest is Stephen Cheung. I'm Tom O'Brien, and we'll be right back.
International business, huh? Number 1, know the culture of that country. Come alive with Pepsi. Translated into Chinese is, Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the dead. PepsiCo made that mistake in Taiwan. Learn about strategic planning, government policy, and policy analysis, and so much more. You can become a part of this exciting career field with a degree from Cal State Long Beach.
Welcome back to Trade Talks. I'm Tom O'Brien with the Center for International Trade and Transportation at Long Beach State University. And our guest, once again, is Stephen Cheung with the World Trade Center Los Angeles and the Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation. And Stephen, before the break, we were talking a little bit about the potential risks to Los Angeles and Southern California of increased trade tariffs and trade wars. I want you to talk a little bit more about that, if you could. Where are the risks coming from? Are they short-term or longer-term? And how do we make sure we sustain a comparative advantage here?
Sure. It's both short-term and long-term, the impact. And recently, I was in China at the end of the year talking about trade tariffs and the potential impact. And around that time, we actually saw that there were some negative sentiments against US-made products. What ended up happening is there was an executive for a tech company called Huawei that was arrested based on certain potential violations. Sure. And so she was arrested in Canada on behalf of really the US government in some ways. So the Chinese government I think they responded negatively. And what we heard is that there were some rumors that companies from China are not allowed to buy, for example, Apple products, Apple phones, and they have to use Huawei phones or Xiaomi phones. And this is a huge impact because China is a huge market for Apple products. So when the Chinese government is actually issuing any order for these major corporations not to buy, it's going to impact our ability. And those are rumors, and we don't know whether that's true or not. But I recently also came back just from Australia 2 weeks ago, and we've been seeing quite a strong decrease when it comes to investments coming from China. About 1.5 years ago, we saw that the Chinese government has issued what they call capital flow restriction. They don't want a lot of the Chinese companies to invest their capital internationally, especially in real estate, hotel projects, or entertainment projects. And guess what's really strong here in the Los Angeles region are those 3 sectors. So with this drop, we just assume that it's actually happening across the world. However, when I got to Australia, the Chinese investment there was strong. The Chinese tourists were there in numbers. So I'm just afraid that because of our relationship with them, that our tense relationship with China right now is actually impacting the investment that's coming into this region and the job creation that's been happening here. And now it's been diverted to other regions like Australia. Good for them, but this is going to have a detrimental impact on our economy.
Right, and is it fair then to say that even if the tariffs are short-lived, those patterns, those travel patterns, those trading relationships that are developed over time could have a much longer-term impact?
And these trading relationships they don't come out of nowhere. We've actually invested millions of dollars into developing relationships, and I would say probably tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. In 2006, the city of Los Angeles opened up a tourism office in Beijing, the first city to ever do so in China. And at that point, we celebrated the fact that we have 150,000 visitors from China every single year. And in 2018, beginning of 2019, Los Angeles announced that it's the first city to have over 1 million Chinese visitors coming into the United States and to Los Angeles. That's a huge increase and huge impact. However, that relationship started back in 2006, and a lot of promotion, a lot of investment has been done in order for us to get to that point. And now, because of a trade dispute, this number will probably start decreasing, which is not good for us because tourism is a huge sector here in the Los Angeles region. And it drives the economy. They come here, they shop, they stay at our hotels, and so we want more of that. So these relationships have impact on multiple industries in the long run as well as the short term, and sometimes we don't even know how to quantify it yet.
And earlier you mentioned that in addition to keeping an eye on what's happening in China and Asia, we have to look to Arizona and Nevada with their trade policies. I think there's a perception out there, whether it's true or not, that the region isn't business friendly or the state's not business friendly because of regulation, taxation, that sort of thing. How do you counter that in an arena where you're discussing trade?
I think California has not been known to be the most easiest place to do business. However, this is a great market for a lot of companies, and that's why we actually, at the World Trade Center Los Angeles and LAEDC, we produce a report every year quantifying the number of foreign-owned establishments that open up operations here. So we have over 10,000 foreign-owned establishments in the Southern California region, and in Los Angeles County is about 5,000 here. So obviously we're doing something right, we're attracting them here. And so I think there's an image that is so difficult because the business environment and the regulations is so challenging, difficult, but when in fact a lot of those challenges are federal issues. So this actually applies for every single state. What we don't do a very good job is actually marketing and telling our story. We have great organizations here like the LAEDC, the World Trade Center, our friends at Long Beach Chamber, LA Chamber of Commerce, all these different organizations that are there to support and help these international companies coming in here. That actually makes their transition a lot easier, but we don't talk about it enough. Instead, I think a lot of times we don't do a very good job marketing internationally. When I travel around the world, I see other states represented. Texas is always around. Florida is always around. They tell our story for us. And I don't think they do a very good job for us.
It's not in their best interest.
That's exactly it. And they've been actively poaching a lot of the companies from California to their states because it's a lot cheaper for them to come to California to take these companies from us rather than travel to these international destinations. So I think part of it is just misconception and misinformation that's been spread out there. But with that said, I do think that we do have higher tax rates and higher sometimes cost of living here. But what balances that is basically our infrastructure, our population, our market size. When you're coming to Los Angeles and coming to California, you're reaching a population of 40 million people in California. And because of our environmental regulations and various regulations, sometimes this is actually the testing ground for a lot of these companies to open up their operation. Because if they can do it here in Los Angeles and do it here in California, they can easily sell to the rest of the United States and the rest of the world because it's such a high standard. However, if you open up your operation in Texas or Arizona, you might be able to sell to the local population, but you can't reach a 40 million population here in Los Angeles. You're going to have to open up another operation in Los Angeles anyways. So might as well just do it right the first time. So one of the things that we try to communicate is that when you're successful in Los Angeles, you actually can reach the rest of the world.
What would you say to someone who makes the argument that our focus shouldn't be on attracting businesses and companies from other places, but growing our own talent and manufacturing base right here at home?
I think both can be true and both should be true. I think right now, looking at the growth in terms of the Los Angeles region and also California, you see that tech is playing a huge, significant role. Silicon Beach is capturing the imagination around the world, and a lot of it is because of the content that's here. Whether it's Netflix, whether it's Google, whether it's Hulu, they're all opening up their operations here. And so with that, we really need to start looking at the clustering effect. The smaller mid-sized company that are basically here because they want to be part of this entire supply chain. How do we make sure that as they're growing, they continue to stay here and they don't go to other location? So that's one part, and we have to look at the educational component to make sure that our students are well-trained and they have the skill sets necessary to fill that the gap, the needs that these companies have. But at the same time, some companies, once they grow, Los Angeles might not be the right market for them anymore, and they go to other states because it might be cheaper for them to do business there. We understand that. But it's very hard for us to be able to recruit companies coming from Texas, from other locations, because we are higher cost states. So the best way for us to do so is actually attract international companies coming in. So I think we can do both. And once these international companies come in here to Los Angeles, they're family. They're part of the Los Angeles fabric. So this goes back to the original question. We are growing the local talent because they are now local once they're here.
You're talking a topic that's critical to me in the education community, and that's the workforce development and talent development. You mentioned skill sets needed to keep the jobs here, to grow them, and to be an attractive region. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those skill sets are? What do companies look for when they're hiring or when they're choosing a region?
One of the top decisions that the reasons that they look at a region is really the talent pool that's here. Because most companies, what they see is the success and their growth really depends on their team. You can have a dynamic CEO and a dynamic product, but the thing is, if you don't have a good team to carry out and implement the execution of that plan, they're stuck. They can't grow. And so part of the reasons why they're located in Los Angeles is because Los Angeles has just a really amazing pool of workers here. We're the only region in the entire United States that actually have 3 top 25 ranking universities in one location. So Caltech, for example, is the #1 research university in the world located right here in Los Angeles, combined with Cal State Long Beach and the CSUs around here, as well. Altogether, there's about 118 higher education institutions located right here in Los Angeles. Every year, we graduate over 5,500 engineers, 1,500 PhDs, and on average, is about 3,000 patents that we produce out of this region. So the talent is here, and the college graduates are here, and so this workforce is basically what's really attracting a lot of these companies that are looking for that right talent. On top of this is the diversity. Los Angeles is one of the most diverse locations on Earth, and so these talented graduates and students not only are they skilled in engineering or communications or public policy, they can also speak multiple languages. They come from different backgrounds. In Los Angeles, we have over 140 nationalities represented, over 224 languages spoken right here in Los Angeles. So when a company that's coming from, say, China or from Indonesia, they can easily hire someone that actually has the skill sets, plus they can communicate with headquarters. So that's an advantage that really a lot of regions they don't have. And so combined together, this is drawing a lot of companies, but when it comes to the skill sets, we're seeing there's a transition from traditional manufacturing into more high tech. So whether it's coding, whether it's automation, whether it's robotics, whether it's blockchain, artificial intelligence, we need to have those technical skills. And not all the jobs are actually require a PhD or a master's degree.
That's right.
So I think a lot of the times what we need to do is make sure that the students, whether it's a CSU system, have the right internship so they are exposed to the needs that are there. The other thing is we're working very closely with the education system at LAEDC to make sure that we're listening to the private sector and basically seeing what those gaps are. And once we identify them, working with the local education institution to create the curriculum so that we can train directly these students and get them ready for those jobs.
Yeah, that's certainly good news to us. And California has always had the reputation of being a place where a young entrepreneur could come up with a crazy idea and test it and run with it and become sort of the next, Google or whatever it might be. Do you still think that's the case? Is this the environment in which young experimenters can take risks and develop products that will find markets around the world?
And this is what's driving a lot of the folks around the world to come to LA. It's because of our openness to innovation, our openness to risk-taking. I'll give you a quick example. There's an Asian American person who grew up in Los Angeles with various background and ethnicities, exposed to the culinary flavors of the Latino culture, was trained on French cuisine, and basically instead of opening their own restaurant in the French restaurant, decided to put Korean short rib into a taco and put it in the truck, and use Twitter to basically transform the entire food truck industry that wasn't in existence. Kogi truck was started right here with Roy Choi, and that has started an entire revolution. I mean, talk about innovation. That's happening right here, from food to communications. You can have Snap, you can have Dollar Shave Club, you have SpaceX. Just a number of different things are the innovations happening. It's always been happening about Los Angeles, but that's what makes Los Angeles such a diverse and such an innovative region, is because we embrace that culture of risk-taking and innovation. And sometimes a lot of folks will be successful, and sometimes people don't do as well. But we also welcome that, because you learn from that experience and you can actually use that experience to launch yourself into other ventures. And so we've been seeing a lot of these new technologies and a lot of new innovation happening right here in Los Angeles.
You've mentioned some of the technologies, but do you see a future where 3D printing or additive manufacturing is driving the supply chain, and that means new opportunities here as well, or is that a threat?
It's both an opportunity and a threat, but the thing is, disruption has always been part of the equation when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to international trade, when it comes to business. We talked a little bit about containerization. That was a very big disruptor that really shook the shipping industry. And now you have automation, you have artificial intelligence, you have Industry 4.0, you have robotics. Those are really threatening the traditional way that we're manufacturing. And a lot of those traditional way that we manufacture and those jobs that are affiliated with it might be in jeopardy. But at the same time, it creates new opportunity for us to look at what's next in terms of the programming, in terms of the new innovation that's going to be coming out of it. And I think that's why we have to look ahead and make sure that our next generation are well trained to take those positions. At the same time, we also have to pay a lot of attention in terms of the displaced workers. What do we do to make sure that they're ready for other types of jobs that are available? And I think we can't just sit around and wait for it to happen. We have to be proactive. And I think that's why we really need to encourage the partnerships between the private sector, public sector, whether it's nonprofit or government, to really come up with a policy and a solution that's actually going to be beneficial for the growth of our economy, but also to prevent some of our existing displaced worker from actually being damaged with this transition.
And while we've talked a lot about Asia and China in particular, I'm assuming that we're going to be seeing increased growth in Latin America's opportunities and Africa as well, moving forward.
Both, but before we go there, actually, I was mentioning that we do a report every year on the foreign direct investment that's happening here. And a lot of people are surprised, but some of our top investors are coming from Europe. It's actually UK, France, Germany. They're huge investors here in this region. So as Brexit is happening with their whole negotiation, the vote didn't go well yesterday, that's going to have a huge impact on our local region as well. I think a lot of people, when they think of Europe, they think of East Coast, but in fact, we have a lot of investment and a lot of trading opportunity there. Though. Second, when it comes to Latin America and also Africa, yes, the growth potentials are there. I think as we're looking around the world, we're seeing that the population growth in Africa, especially with the younger population, they're growing in a fast rate, while China, Japan and the United States, our older generation is growing, but the thing is we're not keeping up with the pace because we don't have as many younger people in the workforce. So I think in the future, actually, we have to pay a lot of attention to Latin America and to Africa. Right now, there are a lot of political and governmental issues and turmoil that's happening around the various regions, but I don't think we can discount them, and I think we need to continue to build those relationships. And trading relationship always starts with that relationship. So I think when people just focus on the business aspect, they miss out on the great opportunity on the human-to-human interest level. So our job, part of what we do at World Trade Center as well, is to make sure that we connect both on the business side as well as the human side.
And I think that's a great place to end our discussion on a positive note, which is good since we ended the second segment on a more ominous note. Stephen, it's been a tremendously informative discussion for our viewers, so thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of Trade Talks, and I hope you'll come back and join us the next time we gather around the negotiating table. I'm Tom O'Brien.